Few things link holiday, cinnamon and comfort baking together as much as Lotus Biscoff, the darling of Instagram chefs and the best part of your in-flight meal. Today we are going to tell you how a biscuit became a pre-modern dating app, fed a revolution and became so popular it has its own emoji on Slack. Baked goods with spices have been around for many years. In the Middle Ages, spiced biscuits were not snacks you made your kids stay away from, they were something you made children eat because it was good for them. However, your little darlings might not be very happy to chew on morsels described as biscuits of joy, as these fat-free nibbles were also not sweetened in any way. Sugar was a rare commodity, carefully weighed out in apothecaries, and honey, while more widely available, wasn't exactly cheap either. Thankfully, humanity used more sweetening in food over the centuries. We'll stop briefly in 1514, when a publisher in Brussels was handing off een notabel boekje van kokerijen. It's not that hard. Or a noteworthy book of cookery. The first cookbook to be published in Dutch. Among the 175 recipes aimed at the wealthy was liefkoeken, a spiced and also sweetened little biscuit. The recipe is not the most descriptive. It tells us to warm an unspecified amount of honey, add an unknown type of spices, mix in an unfixed amount of flour, mold into whatever shape the user sees fit, then bake in the oven at a temperature which the book calls not very hot, which we are finding not very helpful. We can at best make an educated guess as to the type of spices, as cinnamon is mentioned at least 62 times in the book, and the author also had a fondness for cardamom, mace, cloves and ginger. Beyond that, we're more or less fumbling along. And this is what our interpretation of liefkoeken looks like. This is still a far cry from the Biscoff we know today, but it might look familiar to many Germans, because this is in essence an early modern Lebkuchen, which, like Biscoff, belongs in a Western European tradition of spiced cakes. In Germany, the Lebkuchen became more buttery and got an occasional layer of chocolate over time. In the British Isles, gingerbread men started appearing, and in the Low Countries there were tai-tai, peperkoek, liefkoek, mikkeman and the like. People got into the habit of shaping these as biscuit dolls and gave them to children for the feast of Saint Nicholas, the patron saint of children. However, he was also the patron saint of something else. Matchmaking. When a young gentleman wanted to propose to his sweetheart, he would bring her a doll, not just any doll, but a baked huwelijksmaker, or marriage maker. If the lady was interested, she said yes by snapping off the head and returning it to the suitor. However, if she broke off the leg end, that was the equivalent of swiping left. We even have a fairly detailed recipe for it, from 1752, telling us that many tasty ingredients went into this biscuit, like sugar, honey, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, dried citrus peels and almonds. However, it also prescribes more than 8 pounds of dry ingredients bound with only 1.5 pounds of honey as the sole wet ingredient. Others have attempted recreating this and deemed it unworkable. And you thought online dating was hard. The result is apparently not that nice, so we're going to give this one a skip. As the 18th century rolled into the 19th, a version of this biscuit containing butter started emerging. It carried the name speculatie. We don't really know where that name came from, as there are many theories. But one we like is that the dolls were a mirror image of their molds, hence gaining the name from the Latin word for mirror, speculum. To people in Belgium and the Netherlands, Biscoff is just one of many brands marketing their beloved local biscuit, speculaas or speculoos. At this point, we need to address the great biscuit divide. If you go down the rabbit hole of this snack's history and etymology, you'll see that the internet seems to think that these are two very different biscuits. Wikipedia even has separate pages for the two, with the warning not to be confused with speculoos or speculaas, depending on the page. As far as we can tell, there seem to be three things used to separate speculaas and speculoos: the spices, the sugar and the naming. However, we found that the speculaas distinction is not exactly straightforward if you take a closer look at these three criteria. First up, the spices. Lotus Biscoff describes speculaas as a typical cookie from the Netherlands based on specific flavor of speculaas herbs, while speculoos is the biscuit that obtains its taste by the special production process of the caramelization of sugar in the biscuit. The only spice which Biscoff uses is cinnamon. Speculaas recipes, on the other hand, use cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, ginger, white pepper, and other spices in different combinations and quantities, depending on whose recipe it is. If you were to stop here, you would understandably think that speculaas is the biscuit from the Netherlands, chock full of spices, while speculoos is its sweeter, less spicy Belgian counterpart, which Lotus Biscoff came from, using only cinnamon at most. It's actually a little more complicated than that. In the 17th century, modern-day Netherlands, or rather the northern Netherlands at the time, had access to a large supply of spices from overseas territories through the VOC, or the United East India Company. These made their way into the biscuits back home. At the same time, the Spanish Netherlands to the south, which is more or less Belgium these days, was experiencing a snag in its imports. The greater region had been embroiled in a lengthy war which ended when the treaty, the Peace of Munster, was signed. This treaty is important for many reasons, not least of which is the formal recognition of the Dutch Republic. But for our purposes today, the important bit is that because of the treaty, the river Scheldt was ceded to the Dutch Republic and closed for commerce flowing through the port of Antwerp. Trade here would only be revived centuries later. The loss of this major trade hub still stings in the psyches of people from Antwerp even today. Because of this, the Spanish Netherlands, or today's Belgium, found spices a tad more expensive than their northern neighbour, who refused to open the river. But wait! Didn't you say that the Netherlands spicy, Belgium not spicy distinction isn't entirely accurate? Well, there is a modicum of truth to this, but we prefer to think of it less of a north-south border with a hard line in between, and more of a sliding scale, with more spices to the north and less spices to the south. After all, the flow of spices didn't stop at the border. The border was, much like today, quite easy to cross. The spices just got a bit more expensive the further away one got from Amsterdam. In Belgium, Maison d'Andois, the artisanal bakery holding a Belgian royal warrant, makes their speculoos with cloves as well as cinnamon. While Vermeer, Lotus's big competitor in the Belgian market, uses nutmeg alongside cinnamon. In fact, if you walk into different bakeries in Belgium today, you will find different spice mixes for speculoos, depending on what your local baker likes. The sugar, on the other hand, is more of a dividing factor than the spices. Remember Lotus Biscoff's distinction from earlier? According to them, their flavor comes not from the spices, but from that special sugar caramelization. And there actually is a north-south divide between the two biscuits on this particular point. In short, the northern variety uses something called bastard sugar, while its southern counterpart uses candy sugar. Let us explain. As we've mentioned before, sugar, initially made from cane, was a luxury product which gradually became cheaper because of the transatlantic trade and the invention of the sugar beet process. When Napoleon embargoed Britain in 1811, they made cane sugar extremely hard to come by in these parts of the world, thrusting beet sugar into the spotlight. In most parts of the world, brown sugar is obtained by simply refining the raw product less, leaving some molasses behind so that it is less sweet but more flavorful. If you refine the raw product further, you'll get white sugar. In the Low Countries, however, brown sugar is obtained from white sugar. We actually emailed a sugar factory to confirm this. It's a complicated process, but in very simplified terms, when you add something called invert syrup to white sugar and roast it, you will end up with a type of brown sugar which the Dutch call bastard sugar. Apparently so named because it's a mix of two types of sugar. Belgians, on the other hand, use something called candy sugar in their biscuits. Before the port of Antwerp was closed thanks to the Peace of Munster, cane sugar arrived in Antwerp from all over the world. However, the long voyage often caused it to go a little bit off. The solution was to boil the sugar in water and place strings, or more recently, metal frames, into this solution. After a tricky process of heating and evaporating, you would end up with a caramelized sugar solidified around the strings or rods. Please don't try this at home. Normal crystallized sugar is fairly easy to make in the home kitchen, but Belgian candy sugar has been crystallized so slowly and with so much heat that it caramelized in the process. This is truly a special product. Best part, most Belgians don't even realize that their sugar is so special. You won't find this in your local supermarket, and, unlike the Dutch, Belgians never developed a diaspora big enough to maintain a booming export trade. There is, however, good news. There is beer. We'll get to this later. Lastly, there is the issue of the suffix. It's important to point out that while the Netherlands uses speculaas pretty consistently these days, Belgium uses more than just speculoos when naming their favorite biscuit. We found a Dutch poem from 1810 about the proposal biscuit we covered earlier, and it tells young lads to get their lovers a present, using the word speculatie to describe the biscuit. Belgians of an older age will often still use the word speculatie when referring to the baked good, and both speculaas and speculoos are used when marketing this product. People in different regions use different words for the same biscuit, and to many, speculaas and speculoos are synonyms. In a country with many very localized dialects, Lemberg, the home of Lotus Biscoff, seems to use speculoos rather than speculaas. The two are even interchangeable in the etymology dictionary, which also explains that speculoos is probably just a local variety. Thanks in no small part to the popularity of Lotus Biscoff, this has now become an actual distinction outside of the Dutch-speaking world, and increasingly inside as well. So, is there a difference? Yes, but it's a rather recent one. But now, let's get to making a few of them. First up is the spicy Northern variety, which the internet would call speculaas these days. We were lucky enough to find a 1914 manuscript with this recipe, which calls for 500 grams of plain flour, to which we're adding a pinch of salt and a teaspoon of baking powder. Sieve it after adding these so they are mixed in well. Then we need ground almonds, 60 grams of butter, candied fruit peels, bastard sugar, which you should be able to find in Dutch specialty shops. Or just use brown sugar, we won't tell anyone. And finally, the speculaas spice mix. Like we said before, everyone has their own mix, but cinnamon obviously comes first. We're also adding some ginger powder, cloves, aniseed, cardamom, and white pepper. Trying to get a total of about 50 grams, of which at least 30 is cinnamon. If you've made biscuits before, this is where you turn off your biscuit making brain. No creaming the butter, we're being artisanal. Instead, mix all the ingredients but the butter in a bowl. Then knead in the butter until you end up with rough crumbs. At this point, start adding cold water bit by bit until it comes together. Usually, this requires between 100 and 150 milliliters. When you have your dough, leave it to rest for a day in a cool, dry place. Unless you're in a warm climate, don't put it in a fridge though, as that will be too cold. While that rests, let's move on to the less spicy southern variety, which is closer to Biscoff. Now we get to the infamous sugar and how beer aids us in this. The reason the production of candy sugar survived the challenges that beset Antwerp is because candy sugar is a crucial ingredient in the production of dark Belgian beer. As such, many brewery shops will stock it. It's a bit on the pricey side, but if you really want that special caramelized flavor you like Biscoff for, you'll need this. From here it's pretty much the same method as the previous biscuit, but we're adding some wholemeal rye flour, and leaving out the candied peels and almonds, and upping the quantity of butter significantly, tripling it to 180 grams. We have chosen to reduce the spice mix to just cinnamon and cloves, but this is purely a matter of personal taste. Feel free to use the whole gamut of spices if you want to. Form it into a dough, just like we did with the other one. You'll still need a bit of water, but a lot less, thanks to the butter. Then let this rest as well. The next day, both doughs will reek of spices, and that's good. Give them a light knead so that it is just malleable. Then cut off roughly 150 grams. Now take out your mold. Oh, look who it is! In order to prevent ending up with a sticky mess, you'll want to make sure that the mold is well oiled and floured. There is a trick to flouring these wooden molds. Take a tea towel, give it a healthy dusting of flour, ideally rice flour, and then drop the mold onto it. You won't see much flour, but if your mold is well greased, this will ensure it doesn't stick. Pack the mold with dough, and when we say pack, we mean pack. Put your back into it. We want all those details to show up. Now comes the tricky part, cutting the excess dough off the mold. Use a knife, ideally a serrated one. If you drag up some pieces, just patch them up, don't panic. Up next, the really tricky part. Getting them out. If your mold is oiled and floured like we showed, this should be doable. But for your first couple of tries, be ready to get frustrated. Broken biscuits and stuck patches will happen. Practice makes perfect. Also, each biscuit will make the mold greasier, improving its non-stick qualities. When finally removed from the mold, put your biscuits on a sheet and bake them in an oven preheated to 170 degrees Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes depending on the thickness of your biscuit. Now for the tasting. Both are nice, but as we've probably given away, our human is a bit biased and prefers the southern variety. These more buttery ones don't really come out of the molds very well, but they are absolutely delicious. The northern ones are fine too, but remind us more of a rustic gingerbread. They do look nicer though. As you can see, the less buttery one kept its shape a bit better, especially around his head. We were a bit disappointed that even the low butter version lost its facial features a bit. We know a good fisherman never blames his tools, but we are blaming our tools. The facial features on our mold aren't as deep as the elements that did come out nicely. You might not be making dolls to propose with these, but the taste will still win plenty of hearts. We'll leave you with one last variety, the one that also aided Belgian independence. The Hassel's speculaas hails from the east of Belgium, an area known for strong liquor distilleries. A byproduct from these distilleries is molasses, which the distilleries sold at cheap prices to local bakers, who use it in their speculaas biscuits. These days it's fine to substitute this with brown sugar of your choosing, be it candy or bastard. Take 500 grams of flour, 325 grams of sugar, cinnamon, and some finely cut blanched almonds. For the wet ingredients we're using only 175 grams of butter. Trust us, we've seen recipes with a lot more. However, we're compensating with an egg and milk. Yes, so much for the frugal addition of water. We're pigging out with these. Mix together like we did before and leave for a night. In the fridge this time, as these contain eggs and milk. This is actually quite a lean recipe we've adapted from this book. Some recipes we found have more sugar than flour or double up on the butter. Let us know in the comments how you like yours and whether you're still alive. The high calorie count is actually a feature, not a bug, because in 1830 these biscuits were given to soldiers fighting in the Belgian Revolution, which would result in the country emerging as an independent state. While the American Civil War was being fought on hardtack, the Belgians beefed up their rations with buttery sweetness. We get the energy boost and fighting on a sugar high, but the heartburn can't have been a tactical advantage. The next day, roll them into patties and bake them on high heat for 15 minutes. The outside will be crunchy, but the inside should still be a bit soft. So how does this get us to Biscoff? In 1932, a bakery in Lembeker would start making a very lean version, using oils instead of butter, only a pinch of cinnamon, and of course the now essential candy sugar. This bakery was called Lotus, named for the purity of the ingredients. Lotus wasn't the only one making biscuits on an industrial scale. Most swapped the butter with vegetable-based fats, although some fancier brands still use butter, milk and eggs. So why did Lotus win the day and become a world hit? We're not saying that their biscuit is inferior, that's a matter of taste, but they didn't win out against their peers because of just flavor. No, the secret of Lotus was very simple. According to regular Ysewijn, their edge came from the fact that they wrapped their biscuits in small packets. As food production became more industrialized, the hygiene and convenience offered by single or double wrapped biscuits became very popular on airlines, in cafes, and with hairdressers. Lotus lent into this, and in the 1980s, they started marketing their biscuit as the ideal companion to coffee. They came up with the portmanteau Biscoff, meaning biscuit and coffee, which rolls off the tongue a lot easier for an international audience. In 2020, they standardized the name worldwide to Biscoff, including in the Netherlands, France, and especially Belgium, where the reduction of speculaas to the tagline caused quite a bit of a fuss. Belgians did not take this well for about 2 weeks, and then they forgot it ever happened. And there you have it, the story of Biscoff. A biscuit that was the mirror image of a holy man, marked a golden age, brought together couples, got fatter, helped found a nation, and then went on to conquer the world. not bad for a brave little biscuit. We hope you enjoyed this video on the history of speculaas and Biscoff. If you did, it would be great if you could leave us a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. We have a lot of things in the works. If all goes well, our next episode should be rather musical. Hope to see you then. Thank you very much for watching.